It had taken weeks of planning to set up our anniversary dinner. I'd picked out her favorite restaurant, one she hadn't stopped talking about since our third anniversary. The table was reserved by the window overlooking the city skyline. I'd even gone the extra mile and arranged for the staff to bring out a bottle of wine with a ribbon tied around it, her favorite vintage. As we were seated, everything seemed perfect. Olivia smiled that familiar smile, the one that used to light up my world, and for a moment, I let myself believe we could get through the rough patch we'd been having. I had even gone out of my way to buy a custom necklace, a delicate chain with a small pendant engraved with the date of our wedding. I had my speech prepared, ready to remind her of all we had built together. I thought the evening might rekindle something between us, that it might put an end to the coldness and distance I'd felt from her over the past few months. What I didn't know was that Olivia had her own speech prepared, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life. Halfway through dinner, just as the wine arrived and I began to raise my glass for a toast, she leaned forward, her expression unsettlingly calm. "I've been cheating on you for 2 years," she said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "And I'm leaving you." The world seemed to tilt for a moment, and the glass in my hand hovered midair. I waited for some sign that she was joking, that maybe this was some sick anniversary prank. But her gaze didn't waver, and the cold clarity of her words hung in the air like a dense fog. For a brief moment, I felt an overwhelming rush of anger, betrayal, and humiliation. But instead of letting those emotions take over, I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. Raising my glass as though nothing had happened, I said, "To your new life," my voice as steady as hers. Her brows furrowed slightly, the smallest flicker of confusion crossing her face. She had expected tears, yelling, maybe even begging. She didn't expect composure. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deliberate sip of wine. "So," I asked calmly, "does he make you happy?" Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the confident facade she had walked in with cracking ever so slightly. "It's complicated," she muttered, avoiding my gaze. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sure. She thought she was trading up, walking away from a life she deemed predictable and boring. But now, faced with my unexpected reaction, she didn't seem so certain anymore. The waiter approached with the dessert menu, blissfully unaware of the emotional bomb Olivia had just detonated at the table. She waved him off, saying she wasn't interested, but I held up a hand. "I'll take a look," I said casually, flipping through the menu as though nothing had happened. I ordered a slice of cheesecake for myself and asked for a coffee. "You should try the creme brulee," I said, looking up at her. She stared at me, incredulous. "How can you act like this isn't a big deal?" "Because it isn't," I replied, setting the menu aside. "You've made your decision, Olivia. There's no point in me getting upset about it now." That wasn't entirely true, of course. Inside, I felt like my heart was being torn apart. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. When the dessert arrived, I excused myself to step outside. The air was cool, and I took a moment to breathe deeply, letting the night calm the chaos in my mind. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. "Nathan, my lawyer." "Nathan," I said when he picked up. "I need your help. Tonight." He didn't ask questions. That was the thing about Nathan. He understood the gravity of a situation without needing every detail right away. He simply told me to send him what I had, and that he'd be ready to meet in the morning. With that, I made one more call, this time to a private investigator I had hired months ago. Alan had been keeping tabs on Olivia ever since I first noticed the late nights and secretive behavior. "It's happening," I told him. She admitted it. "I need everything we've got ready to go." Alan assured me it was all set, and I felt a small measure of relief. Returning to the table, I found Olivia scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the dim glow of the screen. I could only assume she was texting him, her new, complicated partner. "How will you explain this to the kids?" I asked, sliding back into my seat. Her face faltered, and for the first time all night, she looked genuinely unsure. I don't know," she said. Of course, she didn't. Olivia had planned this betrayal down to the last detail, but she hadn't thought about the consequences. She hadn't considered how it would affect our children, our family. As I finished my dessert, I allowed myself a small, private smile. She thought she had the upper hand, that she was walking away from me with her head held high. But she had no idea what was coming. Returning to the table, I found Olivia hunched over her phone, her face illuminated by the glow of the screen. Her lips twitched with the faintest hint of a smile. She was texting him. She didn't even bother to hide it anymore. Sliding back into my seat, I watched her carefully, noting every small detail. The way she held her phone protectively, the slight blush on her cheeks, the avoidance of eye contact. It was as though she had already erased me from her life. "What will you tell the kids?" I asked casually, breaking the silence. Her head snapped up, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely caught off guard. I'll figure it out," she stammered. The confidence she'd exuded earlier was beginning to crack, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She hadn't thought that far ahead. Her plan didn't extend beyond her own selfish desires. "You'll figure it out?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's reassuring." She glared at me, her defensiveness bubbling to the surface. "You don't need to make this harder than it already is." I chuckled, shaking my head. "Harder for who, Olivia? You?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. The waiter returned to check on us, oblivious to the tension hanging thick in the air. Olivia declined dessert again, but I ordered a second coffee. I had no intention of rushing this moment. As I sipped my coffee, I allowed my mind to wander, reflecting on the months that had led up to this dinner. The signs had been there all along. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she avoided my touch. At first, I thought it was just a rough patch, something all couples go through after years of marriage. I had tried to talk to her, to ask what was wrong, but she always dismissed me. "I'm just tired," she'd say, or "Work has been stressful." But the truth was far more insidious. While I was busy trying to hold our family together, she was out building a new life with someone else. And yet, despite all the evidence, I had stayed silent. I told myself I needed proof, that I couldn't confront her without knowing the full story. That's when I hired Alan, the private investigator. It was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made, handing over my suspicions to someone else, allowing them to pry into my wife's life. But when Alan started sending me photos of Olivia and her lover, laughing together at a cafe, entering a hotel room, kissing in a parked car, I knew I had made the right choice. I had everything I needed: dates, times, receipts, and even recordings of their conversations. She thought she had outsmarted me, but she had no idea how much I already knew. Olivia shifted in her seat, her discomfort growing with each passing second of silence. "Why aren't you angry?" she asked suddenly, her voice tinged with frustration. "Why aren't you yelling or doing something?" I set my coffee cup down carefully, meeting her gaze. "What's the point?" I asked. "You've already made your decision. Getting angry won't change anything." She blinked, clearly unprepared for my calm demeanor. I didn't expect you to act like this." I leaned back in my chair, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "You thought I'd fall apart, didn't you? That I'd make a scene, beg you to stay?" Her silence spoke volumes. The truth was, I had fallen apart. Months ago, when I first realized what was happening, I had spent sleepless nights wondering where I went wrong, questioning every moment of our marriage. But now, sitting across from her, I felt an unexpected sense of clarity. This wasn't about me. It was about her. Her selfishness, her inability to commit, her betrayal. And I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. The waiter returned with the check, and I reached for my wallet. Olivia started to protest, but I waved her off. "Don't worry," I said. "This one's on me." She frowned, clearly suspicious of my behavior. "You don't have to act so magnanimous." "Magnanimous?" I repeated, laughing softly. That's a big word for someone who just admitted to cheating. Her cheeks flushed, and she looked away, fiddling with the edge of the tablecloth. As I signed the receipt, I glanced at her one last time. "You know," I said, my tone light, "you've given me a lot to think about tonight. I hope he was worth it." Her eyes darted to mine, but I didn't wait for her response. I stood, slipping my jacket over my shoulders, and walked toward the door. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath, the cool night air washing over me. I pulled out my phone and dialed Alan. She admitted it, I said when he answered. Good, Alan replied. What's the next move? Send me everything, I said. Photos, videos, recordings. I want it all organized and ready to go. Consider it done, Alan said. Ending the call, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, staring up at the restaurant's glowing sign. Inside, Olivia was probably wondering what I was up to, her mind racing with possibilities. She had no idea that I was 10 steps ahead, that I had been preparing for this moment for months. I walked back inside, sliding into my seat as if nothing had happened. Olivia looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly. What were you doing out there? She asked. I smiled, picking up my coffee cup, just enjoying the fresh air. The game had only just begun, and I was ready to play. The restaurant door opened, and a faint chime rang through the air. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. I had planned this moment down to the last detail. I leaned back in my chair, smiling as Olivia glanced toward the entrance. Her face, already pale from the tension between us, drained of all color when she saw him walk in. You're not leaving just yet, I said, my voice calm but laced with purpose. Her head whipped toward me, panic flashing in her eyes. What did you do? She hissed, her voice low but trembling. I gestured toward the man now standing at the entrance, scanning the room. I figured it was time for a proper introduction. After all, you've been seeing him for 2 years. It's only fair that I get to meet him, don't you think? She froze, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. But there were no words that could save her now. The man spotted us and made his way over, his gait confident but cautious. He clearly didn't know what to expect, though I could see a flicker of excitement in his eyes as he approached the woman he believed was his. David, I greeted him, standing and extending a hand. He hesitated for a moment before shaking it, his confusion evident. Hi, he said, glancing between me and Olivia. I wasn't expecting this. Neither was I said, smiling as I gestured for him to take a seat. But life is full of surprises, isn't it? David pulled out a chair and sat down, still unsure of what was happening. Olivia, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. Her hands clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Marcus, she began, her voice tight with barely concealed anger. This is unnecessary. I ignored her, turning my attention to David. So, I said, pouring him a glass of wine, you're the man my wife has been seeing behind my back. How's that been going for you? David's eyes widened, and he shot a nervous glance at Olivia. I think there's been a misunderstanding, he stammered. No misunderstanding, I said, my tone sharp enough to cut through the air. I know everything. The late-night meetings, the hotels, the lies. Trust me, David, I've done my homework. He looked at Olivia, his expression shifting from confusion to accusation. You said you were going to tell him, he said, his voice low but strained. Olivia shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. This isn't the time or place, she said through gritted teeth. On the contrary, I said, leaning back in my chair. This is the perfect time and place. You've been lying to both of us for years. It's time to get everything out in the open. The waiter approached our table, his cheerful demeanor faltering as he sensed the tension. I ordered another bottle of wine and a round of desserts, ignoring the awkward silence that had fallen over the table. As we waited, I decided to break the ice. So, David, I began, what is it about Olivia that caught your attention? Was it her charm? Her beauty? Or maybe it was her ability to lie so convincingly? Marcus, stop, Olivia snapped, her composure slipping further. David, however, looked genuinely torn. I thought we were building something real, he said, his eyes locked on Olivia. You told me you were trapped in a loveless marriage, that he didn't care about you. I raised an eyebrow. Is that so? And yet, here we are, celebrating our anniversary. Doesn't seem very loveless to me. Olivia's face burned with humiliation, her hands shaking as she gripped her glass. I didn't think you'd actually show up, she muttered, glaring at David. Well, I got a message saying you wanted to meet, he said, frowning. Was that not you? No, it wasn't, she snapped, her anger now directed at me. You set this up, didn't you? I shrugged, taking a sip of wine. Consider it my anniversary gift to myself. The desserts arrived, but no one touched them. The tension at the table was palpable, each of us caught in the tangled web of lies and betrayal. Tell me, David, I said, setting my fork down. Does it bother you that she's been lying to me for 2 years? David frowned, his confusion deepening. 2 years? She told me this started 6 months ago. I watched Olivia's face crumble, her carefully constructed narrative falling apart in real time. I didn't want to overwhelm you, she said weakly. David's expression shifted from hurt to anger. You've been lying to both of us, he said, his voice rising. Welcome to my world, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Olivia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time all night, she seemed at a complete loss. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I need some air, he muttered, storming toward the exit. Olivia turned to me, her eyes blazing. What the hell is wrong with you? Me, I said, feigning innocence. I'm not the one who destroyed our marriage. I'm just cleaning up the mess you made. The waiter returned with the check, his eyes darting nervously between us. I handed him my card, offering a polite smile. Thank you for the excellent service, I said. As Olivia fumed silently, I stood and slipped on my jacket. You should go after him, I said, nodding toward the door. You wouldn't want to lose him now, would you? Her glare could have burned a hole through me, but I didn't care. The game was no longer in her control, and she knew it. With that, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving her to deal with the fallout of her choices. I stood outside the restaurant, leaning against the railing, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint sounds of traffic and laughter from a nearby bar. I took a deep breath, letting the tension ease from my shoulders. Inside, Olivia's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and it was only a matter of time before the cracks became irreversible. As I turned back toward the restaurant, I saw David standing just outside the door, pacing back and forth. His face was pale, his brow furrowed with a mixture of anger and confusion. You all right there, David? I asked, keeping my tone casual. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his jaw tightening. What are you playing at? He asked. Why would you set all this up? Set it up? I repeated, pretending to think. I didn't set anything up. I just thought it was about time we all had an honest conversation. You know, clear the air. Clear the air, he snapped. You're humiliating her. And me? I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. Humiliating you? You've been sleeping with my wife for 2 years, David. If anyone deserves to feel humiliated, it's the two of you. He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, his face reddening. He couldn't argue with the truth. The restaurant door swung open, and Olivia stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Her face was flushed, her eyes burning with fury. David, let's go, she said sharply, grabbing his arm. He shook her off, stepping back. No, I think I'll stay, he said, his tone cold. I want to hear what else he has to say. Olivia's expression faltered, her confidence wavering. She turned to me, her voice low and venomous. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Enjoying it? I asked, tilting my head. Not particularly. I'd much rather be spending my anniversary with someone who actually respects me. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. Instead, she took a deep breath, smoothing her hands down the front of her dress. You've made your point, Marcus, she said through gritted teeth. Can we stop this now? Oh, I'm just getting started, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I motioned for David to follow me back inside, ignoring Olivia's protests. He hesitated for a moment before reluctantly stepping through the door. Olivia trailed behind, her movements stiff and defensive. Back at the table, the half-eaten desserts and empty wine glasses sat untouched, a stark reminder of how far the evening had spiraled out of control. I gestured for David to take a seat, and after a brief pause, he complied. Olivia remained standing, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, she said, her voice trembling with anger. I'm trying to understand, I said, leaning forward. I'm trying to understand how the woman I married turned into someone who could betray me so completely. Her eyes darted away, unable to meet mine. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on him. Tell me, David, I said, turning my attention to him. What did she tell you about me? That I was controlling? That I didn't love her? That I was too busy to notice? He swallowed hard, glancing at Olivia before answering. She said you were distant, that you didn't care anymore, that the marriage was over, but you didn't want to admit it. I nodded, my lips pressing into a thin line. And you believed her. He didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. Olivia finally spoke, her voice defensive. It's not like that, Marcus. You were distant. You shut me out. I shut you out? I repeated, my voice rising slightly. I worked 12-hour days to provide for this family. I sacrificed time with my friends, my hobbies, everything, so you could have the life you wanted. And this is how you repay me? She flinched, her defenses crumbling. I made a mistake, she said quietly. No, Olivia, I said, shaking my head. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary or missing a dinner reservation. What you did was a deliberate choice, a series of choices over 2 years to lie, cheat, and destroy everything we built together. David shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident. I didn't know it was that long, he muttered. I turned to him, my gaze steady. And now you do. So tell me, David, does it bother you that she's been lying to both of us? He stared at me, his jaw clenching. Yes, he admitted. It does. Olivia's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. David. No, he interrupted, standing abruptly. I need to think. He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Olivia and me alone at the table. The silence between us was deafening. Olivia sank into the chair David had vacated, her shoulders slumping as the weight of the evening pressed down on her. Marcus, she said softly, her voice pleading, can we just talk about this? Just the two of us? I stared at her, my expression unreadable. Why? So you can spin another lie? So you can twist the truth to fit your narrative? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. I didn't want it to end like this, she whispered. Neither did I replied, standing. But you made your choices, Olivia. Now you have to live with them. I left her sitting there, the weight of her actions finally sinking in. The door swung shut behind me, and I stepped into the cool night air. David was nowhere to be seen, and for the first time that evening, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. Olivia thought she had control, but now, the narrative was mine. The night air was crisp as I stepped away from the restaurant, the sound of the door swinging shut behind me providing a strange sense of finality. I didn't look back to see if Olivia was still sitting there, her world unraveling piece by piece. I didn't need to. For the first time in months, maybe years, I had the upper hand, and I wasn't about to let go of it. I walked a few blocks before pulling out my phone. Dialing Alan, my private investigator, had become second nature over the past few months. It's time, I said when he picked up. Got it, Alan replied without hesitation. I'll send everything to her and him. It'll be in their inboxes before the night is over. Make it public too, I added, my tone steady but resolute. The people closest to us need to know what she's been doing. There was a pause on the other end. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything, I said firmly before hanging up. By the time I returned home, my mind was racing, but I felt strangely calm. The wheels were already in motion, and there was no stopping them now. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications, emails, texts, and calls flooding in. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into the anonymous account Alan and I had set up weeks ago. The evidence was all there. Photos, text message screenshots, and detailed accounts of Olivia's affair with David. Every lie she had told, every betrayal she had committed. It was all laid out for anyone to see. I watched as the views climbed rapidly, the comments pouring in from friends, family, and acquaintances. Some expressed shock, others disgust. A few, predictably, tried to defend her, but the overwhelming consensus was clear. Olivia had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. My phone buzzed again, and this time, I glanced at the screen. It was Olivia. Her name flashing on the screen filled me with a mix of anger and vindication. I let it ring out, but she called again and again. Finally, I answered, my tone calm but cold. What do you want, Olivia? Her voice was frantic, trembling with a mix of anger and fear. What the hell did you do, Marcus? Why would you do this? Why would I do this? I repeated, leaning back in my chair. Why wouldn't I, Olivia? You spent 2 years tearing apart our marriage behind my back. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences? This is cruel, she spat, her composure slipping. You're trying to ruin me. No, I said evenly. You ruined yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. There was a long silence on the other end, broken only by her ragged breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me, Marcus? I sighed, setting my glass down on the table. What I wanted, Olivia, was a partner. Someone I could trust. Someone who valued the life we built together. But you made it clear that wasn't who you were. So now, all I want is for you to face the consequences of your actions. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. Mutual friends started reaching out, expressing their shock and disappointment in Olivia. Some cut ties with her entirely, unwilling to associate with someone who had betrayed her family so deeply. David wasn't spared either. His employer, a prominent law firm, caught wind of the scandal and placed him on indefinite leave. His reputation, carefully built over years, was now in tatters. And Olivia? She tried to fight back, calling mutual friends and family members to plead her case. But the evidence was undeniable, and the more she tried to explain it away, the worse she looked. A few days later, I received a call from David. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want? I asked, not bothering to hide my disdain. I need to know why you did it, he said, his voice heavy with defeat. Why are everything out like that? I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window. Because you needed to know what it feels like, I said simply. You thought you could walk into my life, take my wife, and destroy my family without any repercussions. You were wrong. He didn't respond, but I could hear his shallow breathing on the other end. Finally, he muttered, I never meant for it to go this far. I laughed bitterly. That's the thing about choices, David. They have consequences, whether you meant for them to or not. By the end of the week, Olivia showed up at the house, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her once perfect exterior now cracked and broken. Marcus, she began, her voice trembling. Can we talk? I stood in the doorway, blocking her from entering. There's nothing to talk about, Olivia. You made your choices, and now you're living with them. Please, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to counseling. I'll cut off contact with David. Just don't give up on us. I shook my head, my expression resolute. There is no us anymore, Olivia. You ended that the moment you decided to betray me. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing down the driveway. That night, as I sat in the quiet of the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved that it was finally over, that the truth was out and the lies were behind me. But another part of me mourned the life I had lost, the marriage, the family, the future I had envisioned. Still, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the one who had destroyed it. That burden was Olivia's to bear, and she would bear it alone. The days following Olivia's public unmasking were nothing short of chaotic. What had started as a carefully executed plan to reveal her betrayal had now spiraled into something far bigger. The ripples of her actions extended beyond our home and touched every corner of her life. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Friends, once loyal to her, began to pull away. Social media posts that once garnered hundreds of likes and comments were now met with silence or outright hostility. The texts and calls she bombarded me with gradually turned from anger and threats to desperation and regret. I didn't respond to any of them. Olivia was a ship sinking fast, and she was discovering just how cold the waters of betrayal could be. For me, the fallout wasn't as chaotic. It was oddly peaceful, a sharp contrast to the storm raging in her world. I moved through my days with a quiet sense of purpose, focused on my children and my work. The kids had been my priority from the beginning. I made sure to shield them from the full brunt of the drama, keeping their routines as normal as possible. But children are perceptive, and they knew something was wrong. "Where's Mom?" my youngest asked one night at dinner, his fork poking at his plate. "She's staying somewhere else for a little while," I said carefully, not wanting to taint their perception of her more than necessary. "But I'm here, and we'll get through this together." He nodded solemnly, clearly not fully understanding but accepting my words nonetheless. My heart ached for them. They deserved better than this. Meanwhile, Olivia's life continued to crumble. She lost her job at the marketing firm. Apparently, David's fall from grace had dragged her down with him. It seemed their company wasn't eager to keep employees embroiled in a public scandal. She reached out to mutual friends, but most of them had already seen the evidence. It was hard to argue against photos, texts, and videos that left no room for interpretation. I heard through the grapevine that she had moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Gone were the days of luxury and comfort she had enjoyed in our family home. Now, she was alone, left to grapple with the reality of her choices. One evening, I received a call from Olivia's sister, Sarah. She and I had always gotten along well, and it was clear she was struggling to reconcile the sister she loved with the woman who had done so much damage. "I don't know what to say, Marcus," she began, her voice heavy with regret. I can't believe she did this. To you, to the kids, to herself." "Neither can I admitted, leaning against the kitchen counter. "She's been calling me non-stop," Sarah continued, begging for help, saying she didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. "What do you want me to do?" I paused, considering her question. "I don't expect you to cut her off," I said finally. "She's your sister. But I can't let her back into my life, Sarah. Not after everything she's done." Sarah sighed. "I understand. Just know that I'm here for you, and the kids if you ever need anything." "Thank you," I said, meaning it. The legal side of things progressed swiftly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had compiled. My lawyer, Nathan, was a bulldog in court, ensuring that Olivia's infidelity was front and center. When the judge awarded me primary custody of the kids, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew I had done everything in my power to protect them and secure their future. Olivia fought hard to retain some semblance of control, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. In the end, the court saw through her attempts to paint herself as the victim. As the divorce was finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering sense of disbelief that this was how our story had ended. One afternoon, as I was unpacking boxes in my new home, I received a text from David. "David ***, can we meet? I need to talk." I stared at the message for a moment, debating whether to respond. In the end, curiosity won out. We met at a small coffee shop on the edge of town. He looked rough, his usually polished appearance replaced by an unshaven face and wrinkled clothes. "I owe you an apology," he said as soon as he sat down. I sipped my coffee, waiting for him to continue. "I didn't know she was lying to me," he admitted. "She told me you were cold, controlling, that you didn't care about her. I believed her. I was an idiot." I set my cup down, meeting his gaze. "You were an idiot," I agreed. "But that doesn't absolve you of your role in all this. You knew she was married, and you pursued her anyway." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "You're right. I have no excuse." For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavily between us. "What do you want from me, David?" I asked finally. He sighed. "Nothing. I needed to say I'm sorry. For everything." I nodded slowly. "Apology accepted. But don't expect forgiveness. Not yet. Fair enough, he said, standing to leave. Take care of yourself, Marcus. You too, I replied, though I wasn't sure I meant it. That night, as I sat on the couch with my kids, watching their favorite movie, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The fallout had been devastating, but it was also necessary. It had cleared away the lies, the betrayal, and the toxic elements of my life, leaving room for something better. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The first morning in the new house felt surreal. The air was quiet, the kind of peaceful silence that had been missing from my life for years. The kids were still asleep upstairs, their laughter and footsteps yet to fill the empty rooms. I sipped my coffee by the window, staring out at the neighborhood that was slowly becoming our new home. It wasn't the grand house Olivia and I had shared. This was smaller, cozier, and free of the memories that once haunted every corner of my old life. It wasn't just a house, it was a blank slate. Moving on wasn't easy. It never is after betrayal of that magnitude. But I found solace in the little things, routine, structure, and the unshakable bond one shared with my kids. I focused on building a home for them, piece by piece. Furniture was rearranged, walls were painted, and a new dining table became the centerpiece of our family meals. One night, as we sat around that table eating pizza and talking about their day, my youngest looked up and asked, "Do you think Mom will ever come back?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken until now. I set my slice down, meeting his wide, innocent eyes. "Mom made some choices that hurt our family," I said carefully. "But what's important is that we're safe now, and we have each other." He nodded, though I could see he didn't fully understand. Maybe he didn't need to. It was during these quieter days that I met Claire. She was my neighbor, living in the house next door. We'd exchanged polite nods and hellos when I first moved in, but it wasn't until she saw me struggling with a stubborn lawnmower that we really talked. "Need a hand?" she called out, walking over with a cheerful grin. "I could use all the help I can get," I admitted, stepping back as she inspected the machine. She fiddled with a few knobs, gave it a hard yank, and the motor roared to life. "You've got to show it who's boss," she said with a laugh. I chuckled, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Thanks. I owe you one." "No problem," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Claire, by the way." "Marcus," I replied, shaking her hand. Claire had an easy way about her, the kind of warmth that drew people in. Over the next few weeks, we'd run into each other more often. At the grocery store, at the park with her dog, and even at the local coffee shop. Each time, we'd exchange a few words, and slowly, those brief encounters turned into longer conversations. She learned about my kids, my work, and even a little about what had happened with Olivia. I didn't go into detail, but Claire had a way of listening that made me feel heard. One evening, she knocked on my door with a casserole dish in hand. "I figured you could use a break from cooking," she said, smiling. The kids loved her immediately, and as we sat around the table eating her homemade lasagna, I felt a warmth I hadn't experienced in a long time. Claire became a regular part of our lives, though I was careful not to rush into anything. Trust was fragile, and I wasn't ready to hand it over so easily. But with each passing day, she proved herself in small, meaningful ways. She helped my daughter with a school project, taught my son how to bake cookies, and even lent me her tools when I decided to build a treehouse in the backyard. One afternoon, as we worked on the treehouse together, she paused, looking up at the structure with a satisfied smile. "You're really good at this," she said. "Years of practice," I replied, hammering in another nail. "I used to build furniture before life got complicated." She glanced at me, her eyes soft. "You should get back into it. You're clearly passionate about it." Her words stuck with me, and that night, after the kids were asleep, I found myself sketching designs for a new coffee table. Claire's presence didn't just bring comfort, it brought inspiration. She reminded me of who I was before Olivia's betrayal, before I let life chip away at my identity. I started small, building furniture in the garage during my free time. What began as a hobby soon turned into a side business. Claire encouraged me every step of the way, helping me market my pieces online and even finding local clients who appreciated my craftsmanship. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the kids play in the yard, Claire turned to me and said, "You're a good man, Marcus." Don't let anyone make you forget that. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I had doubted myself, wondering if Olivia's betrayal was somehow my fault. But Claire reminded me that I was worth more than the pain I had endured. By the time the holidays rolled around, our new house felt like home. The kids were thriving, their laughter filling every corner of the space we had built together. Claire joined us for Christmas dinner, bringing gifts for the kids and a bottle of wine for me. As we sat around the table, surrounded by the warmth of family and friendship, I realized how far I had come. This was what a fresh start looked like. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but full of hope and possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. The call came late in the evening, just as I was tucking the kids into bed. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to pick up. Marcus, the voice on the other end began, hesitant and shaky. It was Olivia. What do you want? I asked, keeping my tone neutral but firm. I need your help, she said, her voice cracking. Everything is falling apart. I let her words hang in the air, refusing to fill the silence. This wasn't my problem anymore. They froze my accounts, she continued, her desperation seeping through the line. I can't pay rent. I've been let go from my job and I don't know what to do. Her admission didn't surprise me. I had heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, how David had abandoned her, how her reputation had been destroyed by the very evidence I'd made public. I'm sorry to hear that, I said flatly. But this is your mess, Olivia. You made these choices. I know, she whispered, her voice barely audible, but I didn't think it would end like this. Her downfall had been swift and brutal. After our divorce was finalized, she struggled to find stable footing. The evidence of her infidelity and deceit had spread far and wide, tarnishing her reputation both personally and professionally. David, the man she had risked everything for, had cut ties with her not long after losing his job. Without his financial support or companionship, she was left to fend for herself. Her once vibrant social circle dissolved overnight. Friends who had once flocked to her dinner parties now avoided her calls. The ones who did stay offered little more than pity, unwilling to get too close to the chaos she had created. She moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the luxury she had once enjoyed. Rumors swirled about her struggling to make ends meet, picking up odd jobs to scrape by. Despite everything, Olivia still tried to salvage her image. She wrote a long-winded post on social media, painting herself as a victim of circumstance and misunderstandings. But the internet never forgets, and the comments were quick to remind her of the truth. Didn't you cheat on your husband for 2 years? One user asked bluntly. Maybe try owning up to your actions instead of playing the victim, another wrote. Her attempt to control the narrative backfired spectacularly, and she eventually deleted her accounts altogether. Meanwhile, my life continued to move forward. The kids and I had settled into a comfortable routine, and Claire had become an integral part of our lives. One afternoon, as I worked on a new furniture piece in the garage, Claire walked in holding her phone. You'll want to see this, she said, handing it to me. It was a news article about David's latest scandal, a lawsuit from his former employer accusing him of embezzlement. His financial troubles had finally caught up to him, and it seemed he was facing serious legal consequences. Looks like karma's making its rounds, I said, handing the phone back to her. Claire smiled. It's almost poetic, isn't it? Not long after, Olivia reached out again, this time in the form of a handwritten letter. The envelope arrived one morning, its edges frayed as if it had been carried through a storm. I debated whether to open it, ultimately deciding that I needed to hear what she had to say. The letter was filled with apologies and regret. She admitted to her mistakes, acknowledging the pain she had caused and the family she had destroyed. I see now how wrong I was, she wrote. I thought I was chasing happiness, but all I found was emptiness. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed to say I'm sorry. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sympathy for her, but it quickly passed. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, deciding not to respond. Her apologies, while sincere, couldn't undo the damage she had done. Months later, I heard through Sarah, Olivia's sister, that she had moved back in with their parents. They had taken her in reluctantly, their disappointment evident to anyone who spoke to them. "She spends most of her days in her old room," Sarah confided during a phone call. "I think she's finally realizing what she lost." "Good," I said simply. Sarah hesitated. "Do you think there's any chance she could rebuild her life?" "That's up to her," I replied. "But she's burned too many bridges to come back to mine." By the end of the year, Olivia had faded into obscurity. The woman who had once commanded attention at every party, who thrived on validation and admiration, was now a shadow of her former self. Her downfall wasn't just a result of my actions. It was a consequence of her own choices, her inability to see beyond her selfish desires. And while part of me felt a sense of closure, I knew that true peace came not from her suffering but from the life I had rebuilt for myself and my kids. That evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire joined me with 2 mugs of coffee. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside me. I smiled, shaking my head. "Just thinking about how far we've come." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "You deserve this, Marcus. All of it." And for the first time in years, I truly believed her. The house was quiet, bathed in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun. The kids were at a friend's birthday party, giving me a rare moment of solitude. I sat in my workshop, sanding down a piece of walnut for a custom coffee table. The rhythmic scrape of the sandpaper against the wood was meditative, a steady reminder that rebuilding something broken takes time, effort, and care. This had become my sanctuary. Whenever the weight of the past threatened to creep back in, I would retreat to the workshop, letting my hands create what my heart was still learning to process. Claire arrived later that evening, balancing a casserole dish in one hand and a bouquet of flowers in the other. "You didn't have to do all this," I said, taking the dish from her and setting it on the counter. "You're right, I didn't," she replied with a teasing smile. "But I wanted to. Plus, the kids love my lasagna." She wasn't wrong. By the time dinner was over, the kids had polished off every last bite, leaving me with little more than a slice to tuck away for lunch the next day. As we cleaned up the kitchen together, Claire looked over at me, her expression serious. "You're doing an amazing job with them," she said. "Thanks," I replied, drying a plate. "I just want to make sure they feel safe and loved. After everything they've been through, they deserve that much." "And so do you," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. Our relationship had grown slowly, rooted in trust and mutual respect. Claire never pushed me to open up about my past, but when I did, she listened without judgment. I didn't think I'd ever be able to trust someone again. I admitted one evening as we sat on the porch, the kids already in bed. After Olivia, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to try. She reached for my hand, her grip warm and steady. "Trust takes time, Marcus, and so does healing. But you're stronger than you think." Her words stayed with me long after the conversation ended, a quiet affirmation that I was moving in the right direction. One morning, Claire showed up with a stack of business cards and a folder of ideas. "I was thinking," she began, spreading the cards out on the table, "your furniture is incredible, and people should know about it. Why not turn this into a full-time business?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Claire, I'm barely keeping up with the few orders I have now." "Exactly," she said, her eyes sparkling with determination. "There's a demand for what you do. We just need to organize it." She wasn't wrong. With her help, I launched a small business, creating custom furniture pieces for local clients. Claire handled the marketing, setting up a website and managing social media, while I focused on the craftsmanship. Within months, the business took off, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose beyond just surviving. The kids thrived in our new routine, too. My son joined a local soccer team, while my daughter developed a passion for art. Claire became an integral part of their lives, attending games and helping with school projects. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, my daughter looked up and said, "Claire, are you going to marry Dad?" The question caught us both off guard. Claire's cheeks turned pink, and she glanced at me, unsure how to respond. "Well," she began, choosing her words carefully, "that's something your dad and I would need to talk about. But I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Her answer seemed to satisfy my daughter, who nodded and went back to her plate. But later that night, As Claire and I sat on the couch, I couldn't help but bring it up. They love you, you know, I said, turning to her. And so do I. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. I love you too, Marcus. All of you. The moment felt like a turning point, a confirmation that the life we were building together was real and lasting. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they served as a reminder of how far I had come, and how much I had to look forward to. Months later, we stood in the backyard, watching the kids chase fireflies under a canopy of stars. Claire wrapped her arms around me, her head resting against my chest. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way I used to. She's a part of my past, and that's where she'll stay." Claire nodded, her fingers lacing with mine. "I'm glad you found peace." "So am I," said, tightening my hold on her. The night ended with the kids curled up on the couch, their laughter still echoing in the corners of the house. As I watched them, I realized that hope and healing weren't just concepts, they were choices. I had chosen to fight for a better life, for myself and for my family. And in doing so, I had discovered something I thought I'd lost forever: joy. 5 years had passed since the dinner that had shattered my world and set me on a path of rediscovery. Time had a way of smoothing the rough edges of the past, but the lessons it left behind were etched deeply into who I had become. The house was alive with laughter and movement. Claire, now my wife, was in the kitchen baking cookies with the kids, their giggles spilling into the living room. I sat at my desk, going over some design plans for a new client, but the sounds of my family kept pulling my attention. It was the kind of life I had once dreamed about, a life filled with love, trust, and simple joys. And it was one I had fought hard to build. Looking back, it was hard to believe how much had changed. Olivia had reached out a few times over the years, always with some variation of the same message: regret, apologies, and the hope for a conversation. I never responded. The last I heard, she was still living with her parents, working a series of odd jobs to make ends meet. The glamorous, carefree life she had chased with David had long since crumbled, leaving her with little more than memories of what she'd thrown away. David, too, had faded into obscurity. His legal troubles had cost him his career and reputation, and he had relocated to a different state. As far as I was concerned, both of them were ghosts, remnants of a chapter one had long since closed. Claire's gentle laugh pulled me from my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, flour dusting her cheeks and a tray of cookies in her hands. "Want a taste test?" she asked, holding out the tray. I took one, biting into the warm, gooey chocolate chip cookie. "Perfect," I said, grinning. She leaned against the doorframe, watching me with that familiar, steady gaze. "You okay?" I nodded, just thinking about how lucky I am. "You deserve it," she said simply. The kids burst into the room moments later, pulling me toward the backyard where we had started planting a small garden together. My son proudly showed me the first sprouts poking through the soil, while my daughter asked a million questions about how plants grow. It was in these small moments that I found the most peace. Life wasn't flashy or extravagant, but it was full of meaning. The scars from the past had faded into the background, overshadowed by the warmth of the present. Later that evening, as the kids slept and Claire and I sat on the porch, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. "You know," I said, breaking the comfortable silence, "there was a time when I thought I'd never feel this kind of peace again." Claire reached for my hand, her touch grounding me. "But you made it," she said softly, "and you built something beautiful out of the ashes." I nodded, my heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." She smiled, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "You would have. I just helped you see what you were capable of." The next day, I sat down to write a letter, not to Olivia, but to myself. It wasn't about blame or anger. It was about gratitude. Gratitude for the strength I had found, the lessons I had learned, and the life I had rebuilt. I ended the letter with a simple promise. I will never forget where I've been, but I will always focus on where I'm going. The years stretched ahead, full of possibility. There would be challenges, no doubt, but I felt ready to face them. As I tucked the letter into a drawer and turned to the sound of Claire calling me for dinner, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This was my life now, a life I had fought for, earned, and cherished. And as I joined my family at the table, the laughter and love surrounding me, I knew one thing for certain. The best chapters of my story were still being written. It was a beautiful day, one of those crisp mornings that promises a perfect celebration. I had polished my shoes, donned my best suit, and even added a small boutonniere Karen insisted matched her sister Lisa's wedding theme. This was a big day for her family, and while I wasn't particularly close to Lisa, I was there to support Karen. When I arrived at the grand venue, a sprawling estate buzzing with guests dressed to impress, my excitement was tempered by a creeping unease. I was proud to stand beside Karen, even if her family treated me like an outsider more often than not. Today, I told myself, was about celebrating love. I approached the entrance confidently, nodding to the security guard at the door as I handed over my invitation. He glanced at it, then at me, and frowned. "Your name isn't on the list," he said flatly. I blinked. That can't be right. "I'm Thomas Reed. I'm Karen's husband." The guard's face didn't change. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't let you in. You'll need to step aside." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Karen had accidentally forgotten to confirm my attendance. Maybe it was some clerical error. But then I saw her, standing a few feet away with her mother, Vivian. They weren't rushing to explain the misunderstanding or vouch for me. Instead, they were laughing. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Karen, the woman I had promised to love and support, stood with a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a giggle. Vivian didn't bother to hide her amusement, her head thrown back in a loud laugh. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. My throat tightened as I glanced at the other guests milling around, some watching the scene unfold. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, and a few phones were raised, capturing this humiliating moment for posterity. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a dull roar drowning out the world around me. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but I knew that would only give Karen and Vivian exactly what they wanted. More humiliation for me, their convenient scapegoat. So, I did the only thing I could. I straightened my shoulders, nodded to the security guard, and walked away. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts raced, replaying the moment over and over. How had it come to this? Karen and I weren't perfect, but I thought we were partners. Yet, this felt like something deeper, a deliberate attempt to degrade me, to show me that in her world, I was expendable. I parked the car and sat in silence, staring at the dashboard. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign, stoic on the outside, but beneath that calm facade, a storm was brewing. I had been ignored before, brushed aside at family gatherings, and treated like an accessory at social events. But this was different. This was public, calculated, and cruel. Later that evening, Karen came home, the faint scent of champagne and roses clinging to her. She didn't seem surprised to see me sitting on the couch. "You didn't stay for the ceremony?" she asked, feigning innocence. I looked at her, searching for any sign of remorse, but all I saw was indifference. "You knew I wasn't on the list," I said evenly. She shrugged, her tone dismissive. "Mom thought it would be best to keep things simple. Lisa wanted an exclusive guest list. You understand, right?" I didn't respond. What was there to say? That night, as Karen slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The laughter, the whispers, the humiliation. It all replayed in my mind like a cruel loop. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect. Respect I realized Karen and her family had never truly given me. I promised myself that I wouldn't forget this moment. It wasn't just a rejection from a wedding. It was a rejection of me as a person, as a partner. And while I didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of the end. The days after Lisa's wedding were a haze of frustration and reflection. The humiliation I endured at the hands of Karen and her mother, Vivian, replayed in my mind constantly. But instead of an apology, Karen carried on as though nothing had happened. In fact, it seemed like the wedding had only added fuel to her social media frenzy. My wife was obsessed with curating an image of perfection, a glamorous, enviable lifestyle that was far removed from reality. Karen's days were consumed with uploading perfectly staged photos, showcasing high-end restaurants, designer clothes, and luxury events. Meanwhile, I was working long hours as a project manager, building a stable, honest career. I didn't mind that Karen came from a wealthier background or that her family enjoyed luxuries I never could. What stung was her complete disregard for the sacrifices I made to support her lifestyle. I'd often come home from work to find her lounging in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her laptop open with online shopping tabs. Packages arrived daily, each one containing something new and expensive: shoes, handbags, jewelry. I'd ask, "How was your day?" She'd wave me off, barely looking up. "Fine." Lisa and I went shopping. Every conversation felt like a transaction, devoid of any real connection. One night, while I was reviewing project reports in my home office, I overheard Karen talking to her mother on the phone. "Thomas just doesn't get it," she said, her voice filled with irritation. "He thinks budgeting means saying no to a new pair of shoes. It's embarrassing." Vivian's response was muffled, but I caught the words "beneath us" and "just a phase." A phase? I clenched my fists, the sting of their words cutting deep. Was that how they saw me? As some temporary inconvenience, someone to tolerate until they could move on to something better? Their attitude toward me was reflected in the lavish events they attended. From charity galas to exclusive brunches, Karen and Vivian were regular fixtures in the city's elite social scene. I was rarely invited, and when I was, it was clear they preferred me to stay quiet and blend into the background. The few times I tried to engage, Vivian would cut me off with a patronizing comment, or Karen would steer the conversation back to herself. It was as though my accomplishments, my opinions, my very presence were an afterthought. I began noticing the stark contrast between our lives more acutely. Karen's Instagram feed was a highlight reel of extravagance. Her posing in designer gowns, sipping champagne with Lisa, and flashing diamond earrings that I hadn't bought her. Meanwhile, my own life was practical, grounded. I paid bills, planned for our future, and handled the day-to-day responsibilities that kept everything running smoothly. But none of that mattered to Karen. What mattered was appearances. One evening, after Karen had gone to bed, I scrolled through her social media out of curiosity. It was all there, the perfect facade. Caption after caption painted a picture of a flawless, glamorous life, grateful for this amazing family and all the blessings in life. My face wasn't in a single photo. Not one mention of me or my role in making those blessings possible. Instead, it was Lisa, Vivian, and Karen, smiling at fancy restaurants or lounging on pristine beaches, the captions dripping with self-satisfaction. The breaking point came when I stumbled across a video from Lisa's wedding. It had been uploaded by one of Karen's friends. The video showed me standing at the entrance of the venue, arguing with the security guard. The camera zoomed in on my confused expression as Karen and Vivian laughed in the background. The caption read, "When you don't belong at the VIP table, face with tears of joy, #awkward moments." My blood boiled. This wasn't just neglect or indifference. This was intentional, public humiliation. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Karen and I had once dreamed of building a life together, but now it felt like I was a mere footnote in her pursuit of social validation. The contrast between our worlds was glaring, and for the first time, I realized just how far apart we had grown. I wasn't angry about her wealth or her family's affluence. I was angry that I had been reduced to a joke, a pawn in her quest for appearances. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a thought occurred to me. How long could I keep living like this? Tension had a way of creeping into my marriage with Karen, slowly but relentlessly, until it became the defining feature of our lives. The more time passed, the more I noticed the distance between us. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, intellectual, and even spiritual. Karen's obsession with maintaining her social status became all-consuming. Her days revolved around glamorous outings, orchestrated photo shoots, and endless conversations with her mother, Vivian, about the latest trends and upcoming events. And then, there was me, the husband who didn't quite fit into her picture-perfect world. It wasn't always like this. I remembered a time when Karen and I laughed together, dreamed together, and talked about building a life that was ours. But those days felt like a distant memory. Now, I found myself watching from the sidelines as she played a starring role in a life I didn't recognize. The tension came to a head one evening when Karen announced, casually and without preamble, that Lisa's wedding would be the event of the year. "It's going to be incredible," she said, scrolling through her phone as she reclined on the couch. Lisa's pulled out all the stops: celebrity chef, live orchestra, the works. I nodded, trying to engage. "Sounds impressive. Are we doing anything to help with the preparations?" Karen barely looked up. "Oh, Lisa's got it covered. Besides, you wouldn't really be involved in the planning. It's more of a family thing." I frowned. I thought I was family. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "You know what I mean." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. That was the thing about Karen. She didn't always need to say something outright to make her feelings clear. To her, I wasn't really part of her family. I was a convenient accessory, someone to pay the bills and provide stability while she pursued her curated version of perfection. As the wedding day approached, the cracks in our relationship became impossible to ignore. Karen spent hours on the phone with Vivian and Lisa, discussing every detail of the event. The guest list, the decorations, the menu. It was all carefully orchestrated to impress. I was rarely included in these conversations. When I tried to join in, Karen would brush me off with a quick, "Don't worry about it," or "This isn't really your thing." It wasn't just the wedding that caused tension. Karen's social media presence had become a point of contention as well. One evening, I glanced at her phone as she posted yet another picture of herself in a designer dress. The caption read, "Grateful for this fabulous life and the amazing people who make it possible." Amazing people? I couldn't help but wonder if I even made the list. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day. Conversations became strained, our shared laughter a distant memory. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone more concerned with likes and comments than the man she had married. The final straw came during a family dinner a week before the wedding. Vivian was holding court, as usual, regaling everyone with tales of Lisa's extravagant plans. "This wedding is going to be talked about for years," she said with a self-satisfied smile. "It's a real family affair." I raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't seem like I've been involved much in this family affair." The table went silent for a moment before Vivian laughed. "Oh, Thomas, don't take it personally. This is Lisa's day. You're more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy." "Behind the scenes?" Karen chuckled along with her mother, and I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just what they said. It was the way they said it, as though I didn't belong. That night, Karen and I argued for the first time in months. "Why do you let them treat me like this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with frustration. "Like what?" Karen shot back. "They don't mean anything by it. You're just overreacting." "Overreacting?" I said, incredulous. "Karen, I'm your husband. I should feel like I'm part of your life, not some outsider." She sighed, exasperated. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Can't you just let it go?" Let it go. I didn't say anything else that night. What was the point? Karen had made it clear where her priorities lay, and I wasn't one of them. The tension between us was no longer something I could ignore. It had become the defining feature of our marriage, a constant, unspoken presence that colored every interaction. And as Lisa's wedding drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to reach a breaking point. The day of Lisa's wedding had finally arrived. It was all anyone in Karen's family could talk about for weeks. The high-profile guest list, the glamorous venue, the endless luxuries that only someone with Vivian's influence could orchestrate. For Karen, this was more than a family celebration. It was a chance to flaunt her status, to step into the spotlight and bask in the admiration of the elite. For me, it was something entirely different. I dressed carefully that morning, pulling on the tailored suit Karen had picked out for me months earlier. The memory stung now, as I realized it was more about how I'd look in photos than any actual consideration for me. Karen was already gone by the time I finished getting ready. She left early to help Lisa with last-minute preparations, though help likely Mint sipping champagne and posing for pre-ceremony pictures. I followed behind in my car, my nerves building with each mile. After the tension of the past few weeks, I hoped that being present at the wedding might help bridge the growing gap between Karen and me. When I arrived at the venue, it was every bit as opulent as expected. A sprawling estate with manicured gardens, fountains glistening in the sunlight, and valets darting between luxury cars. Guests in designer dresses and tailored suits milled about, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I approached the entrance, where a stern-looking security guard stood with a clipboard. "Name?" he asked curtly. "Thomas Reed," I replied, offering a polite smile. The guard scanned his list, his brow furrowing. "You're not on here." For a moment, I thought he must have made a mistake. "That can't be right," I said. "I'm Karen's husband. I was invited." The guard's expression didn't change. "Your name isn't on the list. I can't let you in." I glanced around, searching for Karen or anyone who might vouch for me. That's when I saw them. Karen and Vivian standing a few yards away, watching the exchange with thinly veiled amusement. Karen turned to her mother and said something, and they both laughed. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I tried to reason with the guard one last time. "Please, can you check again? This has to be an error." But his tone remained firm. "I'm sorry, sir. You need to step aside." As I moved away from the entrance, the reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen and Vivian had orchestrated this humiliation, reducing me to a spectacle for their amusement. To make matters worse, I noticed several guests looking in my direction, their whispers and sidelong glances making my humiliation complete. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from social media. Curious and dreading it at the same time, I opened the app to find a live stream. The video was clear. Me standing awkwardly at the entrance, the guard denying me entry, and Karen in the background, laughing. The caption read, "When you don't make the VIP list. Face with tears of joy #awkward husband moments." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, my face heating with anger and shame. They hadn't just humiliated me in front of their friends and family. They had broadcasted it to the world. I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove away, my mind swirling with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being Karen's partner, her confidant, to the butt of her jokes? That evening, Karen came home late, still glowing from the success of the event. "Why did you leave?" she asked casually, as though nothing had happened. "You know why," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. She shrugged, completely unfazed. "It's just a bit of fun, Thomas. Don't take everything so seriously." I stared at her, searching for some trace of guilt or remorse, but there was none. She didn't care. Not about the humiliation, not about my feelings, not about us. That night, I lay awake, replaying the day's events in my mind. The laughter, the whispers, the live stream. It all felt like a cruel joke at my expense. But more than that, it felt like a turning point. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. Karen and her family had shown me exactly how they saw me, and it was a truth I couldn't ignore. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Something had to change. The morning after the wedding humiliation, I woke up to the relentless buzzing of my phone. At first, I thought it might be work, but as I unlocked the screen, my heart sank. Social media notifications flooded in, tags, comments, and messages, all stemming from that live stream. Karen's fun, at my expense, had gone viral. Strangers I'd never met weighed in on my life, turning my humiliation into their entertainment. I scrolled through the comments, each one more cutting than the last. Imagine being so pathetic your own wife doesn't want you at the wedding. This guy seriously thought he was VIP material? Face with tears of joy. Karen deserves better. My chest tightened as I read them, the words cutting deeper than I expected. I wasn't just embarrassed anymore. I was furious. Karen had crossed a line, and now I was left to face the fallout. When Karen came downstairs, she was her usual self, calm, composed, and completely unaware of the storm she'd unleashed. Morning, she said breezily, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her coffee. Morning, I replied, my voice clipped. She didn't notice my tone, too absorbed in her social media feed. That was, until she came across the comments. Oh, she muttered, her expression shifting ever so slightly. People can be so mean online. I stared at her, incredulous. Mean? Karen, they're mocking me because of what you and your mother did yesterday. She looked up, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? The live stream. The comments. The whole scene you orchestrated at the wedding, I said, my voice rising. Do you even realize how humiliating that was for me? Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, Thomas. It was a joke. People are just overreacting. A joke? I repeated, my anger boiling over. You publicly humiliated your husband. How is that a joke? Karen sighed, clearly annoyed. You're being dramatic. If you can't handle a little harmless fun, that's on you. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. It was clear Karen didn't see, or didn't care about, the damage she had done. Harmless fun, I said, my voice steady but cold. You've turned me into a joke, Karen, and now I'm the one who has to deal with the fallout. She didn't respond, instead turning back to her phone. The backlash wasn't limited to strangers online. At work, my colleagues tiptoed around me, their awkward smiles and hushed whispers confirming they'd seen the video. During a meeting, one of them made a passing comment, trying to lighten the mood. Hey, Thomas, maybe you should try getting on the guest list next time, huh? The room erupted in laughter, but I sat there, stone-faced. It wasn't just the jokes, it was the pity in their eyes. Everyone saw me as the man whose wife didn't respect him, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. At home, things weren't any better. Karen continued to post her curated version of life online, ignoring the growing tension between us. She acted as though nothing had happened, brushing off any attempt I made to address the situation. But the worst part was the silence from her family. Vivian, who had been so vocal in orchestrating the wedding, had nothing to say about the fallout. It was as though they had washed their hands of me entirely. As the days passed, the online harassment only intensified. Karen's followers latched onto the narrative she had created, painting me as the unworthy husband who didn't belong in her glamorous world. I started receiving private messages, some taunting, others offering unsolicited advice. Maybe you should step up your game if you want to keep a woman like Karen. She deserves someone who can match her lifestyle. Each message was a reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the relentless barrage of comments, I realized something had to change. Karen's disregard for my feelings wasn't just a problem. It was the problem. For years, I had put up with her family's condescension and her obsession with appearances, convincing myself it would get better. But this wasn't something I could fix. Karen didn't respect me, and without respect, there was nothing left to salvage. The next morning, I made a decision. When Karen came downstairs, I handed her the laptop, open to a page full of comments from her followers. Read these, I said, my tone firm. She glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. This is what your harmless fun has done, I continued. You've made me a target, Karen. And for what? To entertain your audience? She looked at me, for once at a loss for words. I'm done, I said simply. I won't be part of this anymore. I left the house that day with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I realized I didn't need Karen's approval, or her family's, for validation. The backlash had been painful, but it had also been eye-opening. It was time to reclaim my dignity and focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding my life on my terms. The morning after my declaration, the house felt unusually quiet. Karen hadn't said much when I walked out the door the previous day, and I suspected she was still trying to process the situation. For once, I didn't care what she thought. My mind was focused on one thing, moving forward without her chaos weighing me down. But just as I was settling into the idea of reclaiming my peace, everything began to unravel, for Karen and her family. It started with a knock on my office door during lunch. Jeff, one of my coworkers, peeked in with a hesitant expression. Hey, Thomas, have you seen this? He asked, sliding his phone across the desk. I looked down to see an article on a local gossip blog. The headline read, "Reed Wedding Fallout, Behind the Scenes of a Social Media Disaster." My stomach twisted as I skimmed the article. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was a full expose on Karen's family, detailing their superficiality and the facade they had built over the years. Apparently, the wedding fiasco had caught the attention of a journalist who dug deeper into their lives. The article revealed how Vivian and Lisa had inflated their social status by exaggerating wealth, relying on loans and credit cards to maintain appearances. Karen wasn't spared either. Her social media posts were dissected, exposing the stark contrast between her curated life and reality. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt nothing. It was a hollow victory, watching their carefully constructed world crumble under the weight of their lies. Later that evening, I returned home to find Karen and Vivian in the living room. Vivian's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a look of desperation. Karen's face was streaked with tears, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "We need to talk," Karen said, her voice trembling. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "About what?" Vivian jumped in, her tone frantic. "This article is ruining us, Thomas. Everyone's talking about it. Lisa's sponsorship deals are falling through, and people are canceling collaborations with Karen. The wedding fallout has become a PR nightmare." I raised an eyebrow. "And what does this have to do with me?" Karen stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Thomas, please. You're good at damage control. You can help us fix this." I couldn't help but laugh. "Fix this? Karen, you and your family have spent years treating me like an afterthought. You humiliated me in front of your friends, your family, and the entire internet. And now you want my help?" Vivian interjected, her tone sharp. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. It was all just miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You orchestrated my public humiliation. That wasn't a miscommunication. It was deliberate." Karen broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, okay? I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I interrupted. "That's the problem, Karen. You never thought about how your actions would affect me. And now that your perfect little world is falling apart, you expect me to clean up your mess." She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, realizing there was nothing she could say to justify her actions. The fallout extended beyond their social circles. Vivian revealed that creditors were calling, demanding repayment for the loans used to fund Lisa's extravagant wedding. The vendors were threatening lawsuits after not receiving full payment. "Thomas," Vivian pleaded, "you have connections. You could talk to them, negotiate something." I shook my head. "No, Vivian. You and your family made this mess, and you'll have to deal with the consequences. I'm done being the person you walk all over whenever it's convenient." The desperation in the room was palpable. Karen looked at me, her expression a mix of regret and helplessness. "I'll do better," she said softly. "I'll make this right. Please, just don't give up on us." I stared at her, searching for sincerity in her words. But all I saw was someone grasping at straws, trying to salvage a life that had already fallen apart. "I gave you everything, Karen," I said, my voice steady. "My support, my loyalty, my love. And you threw it all away. I'm not giving up on us. You already did." That night, I packed a small bag and left the house. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I simply walked away, leaving Karen and Vivian to deal with the wreckage they had created. As I drove to a hotel, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations or their toxic behavior. The fallout from the wedding had exposed the truth about Karen and her family, and it was clear they were more concerned with saving face than making amends. But I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The humiliation at the wedding, the social media fallout, and Karen's hollow apologies were enough to make me believe that nothing else could shock me. But as I moved forward, trying to put distance between myself and her family's chaos, I stumbled upon truths that made everything I'd endured seem like the tip of the iceberg. It started with an unexpected phone call. "Thomas," a voice said hesitantly, "this is Melissa, Lisa's former event planner." I frowned. Former? Yes, she sighed. I resigned after the wedding fiasco, but I wanted to reach out because, well, you deserve to know what really went on behind the scenes. I gripped the phone tighter. Go on. Melissa proceeded to unravel a tangled web of deceit and manipulation. She told me about the lavish expenses for Lisa's wedding, expenses that Karen and Vivian had justified as necessary to maintain their image. But what struck me most was how these expenses were funded. The money didn't come from Vivian, Melissa revealed. Karen borrowed against your joint accounts. She didn't tell you? My stomach churned. Karen had drained our savings to fund a spectacle that I wasn't even allowed to attend. The more Melissa shared, the clearer the picture became. Karen and Vivian had been living beyond their means for years, using loans, credit cards, and shady financial maneuvers to maintain their illusion of wealth. But what really made my blood boil was Melissa's next revelation. I overheard something during the wedding preparations, she said, her voice hesitant. Karen and Vivian were laughing about you. They said you were too simple to understand how money worked and that you'd never notice if they used your funds. Her words hit me like a freight train. That evening, I returned to the house, not to reconcile, but to confront Karen and demand answers. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Vivian wasn't there, and for that, I was grateful. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Karen looked up, surprised by my tone. What's wrong now? I threw the bank statements on the table in front of her. Care to explain this? She glanced at the papers, her face paling as realization set in. Thomas, I can. Don't, I snapped. Don't lie to me. Melissa already told me everything. You drained our accounts to fund your sister's wedding, and you thought I wouldn't notice? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It wasn't like that, she stammered. We were going to pay it back. You know how important appearances are to my family. Appearances? I said, incredulous. You sacrificed our future for appearances? Do you even hear yourself? She stood, her voice rising. You don't understand what it's like, Thomas. My family has expectations, and I had to meet them. You've always been content with your modest life, but I couldn't live like that. Her words stung, but they also confirmed what I had suspected for years. Karen didn't see me as an equal partner. To her, I was a means to an end, a convenient provider who could be discarded when I no longer served her purpose. You used me, I said quietly. Not just my money, but my trust, my love, everything. And for what? To impress people who don't even care about you? Karen's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. The final blow came when I confronted her about the live stream and her mother's involvement. Was humiliating me at the wedding part of your grand plan too? I demanded. She hesitated, which was all the confirmation I needed. It wasn't personal, she said weakly. It was just fun. People like that kind of drama. I shook my head in disbelief. You humiliated your husband for social media clout. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? Karen broke down, sobbing. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I was just trying to keep up, to make things work. Her tears might have moved me once, but not anymore. I don't care about your excuses, Karen, I said firmly. You betrayed me, and you betrayed this marriage. There's nothing left to salvage. She looked up at me, desperation etched on her face. So that's it? You're just giving up? No, I said, my voice steady. You gave up on us the moment you chose your family's image over our relationship. I'm just accepting it. I packed the last of my things that night, determined not to look back. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also given me clarity. Karen's actions had shown me who she truly was, and I refused to let her drag me down any further. It was time to start over, free from her lies and manipulation. It was almost a week after I left when Karen reached out to me. The silence had been deafening on her end. No texts, no calls, until my phone buzzed with her name on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in me decided to pick up. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Thomas, can we talk? I sighed. leaning back in my chair. What do you want, Karen? She hesitated. I want to apologize. For everything. Part of me wanted to hang up right there, to shield myself from whatever manipulative tactics she might use next. But the other part of me, perhaps the part that once loved her deeply, wanted to hear what she had to say. Go on, I said curtly. I messed up, she began. I let my family's expectations get in the way of what really mattered. I hurt you, Thomas, and I don't even know how to begin making it right. Her voice cracked, and for a brief second, I thought she might actually be sincere. Is this about the money, Karen? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Or is it about your reputation falling apart now that everyone knows the truth? There was a pause. It's not about the money, she said quietly. It's about us. About how I took you for granted. How I let myself get so caught up in appearances that I lost sight of what we had. What we had. I repeated, incredulous. Karen, you didn't just take me for granted. You humiliated me, lied to me, and used me. Do you even understand the damage you've done? Her tears came in earnest then, her sobs barely contained. I know, Thomas. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't believe how far I let things go. I've lost everything, and it's my fault. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, but I couldn't let myself soften. Not yet. Karen, do you even understand what forgiveness means? I asked. It's not just about saying you're sorry and expecting everything to go back to normal. It's about taking responsibility for your actions, about actually making changes. And from where I'm standing, all I see is someone who's sorry because they got caught. She was silent for a long moment, and I could hear her steadying her breathing. You're right, she admitted. I haven't earned your forgiveness. And maybe I never will. But I need you to know that I'm going to try. I'm going to make things right, even if it's too late for us. For the first time, her words felt genuine. But that didn't mean I was ready to let her back into my life. Karen, I said, my tone softening slightly, I appreciate the apology. I really do. But you need to understand that this isn't something you can fix with words. You broke my trust, and that's not something I can easily get back. I know, she whispered. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I sighed, feeling a twinge of sadness despite my resolve. I hope you mean that, Karen. I really do. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means moving forward, separately. After I ended the call, I sat in silence, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. Karen's apology had felt sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. For me, the apology wasn't closure. It was confirmation that walking away had been the right decision. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. Karen's apology, while appreciated, didn't change the fact that I had a new life to build. A life free from manipulation, humiliation, and toxic relationships. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The day after Karen's apology, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because her words had magically mended everything, but because I knew I was no longer tethered to her chaos. The weight of her manipulation and my constant attempts to hold our marriage together were gone, and in its place was a quiet clarity. For the first time in years, I focused solely on myself. I started small, tackling the things I had neglected in the wake of our crumbling relationship. My apartment, a temporary refuge after leaving the house, was bare and impersonal, but I began making it my own. A few framed photos, a comfortable couch, and a new coffee maker were simple additions, but they felt like steps toward rebuilding a life that was mine. Work became my sanctuary. As a project manager, I thrived on structure and progress, and throwing myself into my career helped me regain a sense of control. My coworkers, once hesitant to approach me after the wedding debacle, started treating me with a newfound respect. Maybe it was because I carried myself differently, no longer weighed down by Karen's dismissive comments or Vivian's judgmental stares. One afternoon, Jeff, the coworker who had shown me the article about Karen's family, stopped by my office. Hey, Thomas, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You seem different lately. Happier, maybe? I smiled. I guess you could say I've been doing some spring cleaning. clearing out the toxic stuff in my life. Jeff nodded, grinning. Good for you, man. You deserve it. His words, though simple, resonated. For so long, I had felt like I was drowning in a sea of other people's expectations. Now, I was finally breathing again. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. Karen had always discouraged me from maintaining those relationships, dismissing my friends as too ordinary for her taste. One evening, I met up with an old college buddy, Marcus, at a local bar. "You look good, man," Marcus said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Better than the last time I saw you." "Thanks," I replied, sipping my beer. "It's amazing what leaving a toxic situation can do for your sanity." Marcus chuckled. "Well, here's to new beginnings." We raised our glasses, the clink of the toast feeling like a symbolic moment. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed more changes, not just in my surroundings, but in myself. I started running again, something I hadn't done since Karen dismissed it as a hobby for people who can't afford gym memberships. The rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement became a form of therapy, a way to process everything I had been through. I also rediscovered my love for photography, dusting off my old camera and venturing out to capture sunsets, cityscapes, and candid moments of life around me. Each photo felt like a snapshot of my journey, proof that I was moving forward, one step at a time. Karen reached out a few more times during those months. Her messages ranged from apologetic to accusatory, depending on her mood. Sometimes she would beg for another chance, claiming she had changed. Other times, she would lash out, accusing me of abandoning her and refusing to take responsibility for her actions. I didn't respond to most of her messages. When I did, it was brief and to the point. "We're done, Karen. I wish you the best, but I'm moving on." The final message came one morning in early spring. "I hope you find happiness, Thomas," she wrote. "I'm sorry for everything." This time, I didn't feel the need to reply. Moving forward wasn't just about cutting ties with Karen. It was about redefining what I wanted for myself. I set new goals for my career, taking on more challenging projects and earning recognition for my leadership. I started traveling, visiting places I had always dreamed of but never prioritized. In the process, I met new people who valued me for who I was, not for the image I projected. One of those people was Clara, a photographer I met during a local art exhibit. She was vibrant, down-to-earth, and completely uninterested in social media clout or superficial appearances. Our connection was easy, unforced. Over coffee one evening, she asked me about my past. I hesitated, unsure how much to share, but her genuine curiosity made me feel safe. "I've been through some interesting times," I said, smiling wryly. She laughed. "Haven't we all? The important thing is where you are now." Where I was now, I realized, was a far cry from where I had been. That night, as I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Karen and her family had once dominated my life, their expectations and judgments shaping every decision I made. But now, they were just a chapter in my story, a chapter that had taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and resilience. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning from it, growing stronger because of it, and using those lessons to build a future that was truly mine. Months had passed since I walked away from Karen and the life we had built, or rather, the life I had sacrificed to maintain while she focused on appearances. In that time, I had discovered a sense of freedom and peace that felt almost foreign after years of living under the shadow of her family's expectations. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely new book. My days were no longer filled with the tension of trying to measure up to someone else's version of success. Instead, I woke up each morning with a sense of purpose that came from pursuing things that genuinely mattered to me. The apartment I had once considered a temporary refuge was now my sanctuary. I had filled it with pieces of myself, photos from my travels, mementos from new experiences, and the kind of cozy, lived-in charm that Karen would have deemed ordinary. For the first time, I felt like I was truly home. My career was thriving as well. Without the constant distractions and emotional drain of my marriage, I had thrown myself into my work, taking on ambitious projects that showcased my abilities. One particular project, a community development initiative I had spearheaded, earned me recognition from local leaders and opened doors to opportunities one hadn't dared dream of before. It wasn't just about professional success, though. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of greatness, regardless of what Karen or her family had thought of me. Then there was Clara. Our friendship had grown naturally over the months, evolving into something I hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. She had a way of seeing the world, and me, that felt refreshing and real. She didn't care about my past failures or the scars left by my marriage. To her, I was just Thomas, a man rediscovering himself, learning to laugh again, and finding joy in the simple things. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, Clara turned to me and said, "You seem lighter these days. Happier." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "I think I finally am." Karen had reached out a few more times since her final apology, but I never responded. It wasn't out of anger or bitterness. I had simply moved on. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, and closure didn't require a conversation. I had given her enough of my time, my energy, and my heart. It was time to reserve those things for myself and the people who truly valued them. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through an online article about Lisa's wedding fallout. The headline read, "The Rise and Fall of Social Media's Perfect Family." It was a thorough exposé detailing the financial ruin, reputational damage, and personal struggles that had followed the wedding debacle. Karen's name was mentioned briefly, her image reduced to a footnote in her family's public implosion. I closed the tab, feeling no sense of schadenfreude, just a quiet relief that I was no longer part of their story. The true turning point came on a sunny Saturday morning. I was sitting on my balcony, sipping coffee and flipping through a travel magazine, when a thought struck me. I was free. Truly, completely free. I could go anywhere, do anything, and build a life that was entirely my own. That realization was both exhilarating and humbling. Over the next few weeks, I began planning a trip, a journey that would take me to places I had always dreamed of visiting but never prioritized. Clara, ever the adventurer, offered to join me for part of it, and I eagerly accepted. The trip felt symbolic, a physical representation of the emotional journey I had been on since leaving Karen. It wasn't about running away from the past. It was about embracing the future with open arms and an open heart. As I stood in the airport, boarding pass in hand, I glanced at my phone one last time. There were no messages from Karen, no lingering ties to the life I had left behind. I smiled, slipping the phone into my pocket and stepping onto the plane. The journey ahead was mine to define, filled with possibilities, growth, and the kind of happiness that comes from living authentically. Karen had once said I wasn't enough, but I knew better now. I was more than enough, and I didn't need anyone else to validate that. The world was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, so was I.